Tricia Berry, welcome to Competencies Without a Classroom. I'm pumped that you're here. You and I have had the chance to work together a little bit over these past few years. So I know that you're doing some really amazing stuff. So it makes me that much more excited that our listeners now will get a little bit of a window into some of the amazing work that you and your team in New Brunswick have been up to. But before we get into all that fun stuff and learn a bit more about you, Tricia, we're going to start off with the most important question that you're going to get today. It kind of helps to set a bit of a tone for the rest of the interview. And honestly, it's the question that our listeners want an answer to. So with that, Tricia, when it comes to pineapple on pizza, are you a yes or a no?
That's a good question. I like kicking it off with that. I am definitely a pineapple yes on pizza.
It's a great answer. That's what our listeners wanted to hear. That's at least what I'm assuming.
I have lots of people on my side now.
Yes, there are. It's definitely still divisive, but the majority we're slightly ahead with the yeses. So now that you won our listeners over, Tricia, give us a bit of background. Who is Tricia Berry and what are you doing for work right now?
Okay, well, Damien, thank you so much for having me on your podcast. And I'm really excited to share some of the work that we're doing in New Brunswick. So my role is a learning specialist with the New Brunswick Department of Education and Early Childhood Development. And my focus is on universal design for career education, and that's across K to 12. So I work with education support services within the department, and it's been my focus since the time that I arrived at the department to look at advancing career education across the system K to 12 and really focusing on our most marginalized youth and how we can work to better level the playing field and ensure that everyone is getting equal access to career development and career education in order to, successfully transition throughout school, but also successfully transition into life and work.
Yeah. And we've been super grateful to be, a small part of that journey and watch all the amazing work that you and your team have been doing across the province. Speaking of which, you're very humble, but some of your work through the Future Ready Learning Program was just profiled in an OECD report about career education. Can you share a little bit about that?
Well, the OECD is currently underway doing a project on career readiness for youth, and they are gathering research and data to look at ways to support schools and primarily youth in successfully transitioning and having success in the future, especially with everything that's happening with the pandemic and the obvious economic issues that have developed as a result of that, and thus what that will do for young people. Mm-hmm. And so we were really pleased to be included in that project, and most recently featured on their website as an example of practice. So countries around the world are sharing examples of best practice so that we can learn from one another and really try to do our very best to help young people as they move into the future.
Yeah, it's super cool. And we're going to link to those links in the show notes so everyone can check that out. But to build off that, so we're talking about examples of practice. Let's get into that. That's what we're all listening here for today. Season 1 of this podcast was focused on talking with industry professionals about what are those core competencies? What are the 21st century skills that they're looking for when building out their 21st century teams? And what do they look like in action? Right? We all know we have to tell our students that it's going to be important to be a problem solver and a critical thinker and a great communicator, but what does that actually look like, right? And so that's what season 1 was all about. We had some great stories, some great examples. Season 2, now we're focused on bringing it back to the classroom. So we know that there are some amazing educators doing a really great job of developing those skills in their students, but oftentimes those stories, those conversations are siloed. So we're trying to make it our mission with season 2 with this 21 for 21 campaign to amplify the voice of the educator. You mentioned already, Tricia, you're not the typical classroom educator. You're supporting educators across the province with future ready learning. Can you share some examples about some of the best practices that you share with educators as it relates to developing these 21st century skills?
Yeah, for sure. So, what you're doing with this part of the podcast is exactly what we're doing in New Brunswick. And, looking at how do we, collectively as a province from K to 12 intentionally incorporate career development best practices into the classroom. That's my mission. That's my mandate and how I support teachers. And so, we're really looking at modernizing career development. We can't continue to do career education as we always have because the world does not look like it did in the past. Right now, and the future is completely different than it ever has been in history. And so obviously we have to respond differently. And so a big part of that is what you did in your other series where you looked at, what is it that young people need to be successful, those competencies, those skills. We're in a skills-based economy, not a jobs-based economy. We have to focus on those very skills. And so a big part of what teachers do is they are constantly working on those skills with young people. I believe that every teacher in New Brunswick is helping students to, develop their ability to work in a team and their abilities to problem solve and be critical thinkers. I really do believe that is happening and has been happening. But I guess the shift is we need to work on being a little more intentional about that and drawing the connection to the real world. I always say we have to open the window to the adult world for kids and actually have conversations about what's happening and what one is learning. So for example, in a classroom, the teacher may know that they are putting their students in teams and they're going to be working on collaboration and they're going to be working on problem solving. The teacher knows all that logically in their mind. But I guess it's when the teacher stops and says, this is what we're learning. You're learning how to work well with others. You're learning how to use those problem-solving skills. Why do you think we need to develop those? Where would you use that in life and work? Where have you seen adults that use those skills? So it's not a difficult concept. It's just a matter of having those open conversations and helping make the connections between the real world, the adult world, and what students are learning in school. And then you're doing career development. It's really just a small pivot.
Yeah, I love that so much, Tricia, and that helped to kind of answer the next question is how do you make sure it's not one more thing, right? It's already a part of what they're doing, but it can be as simple as what I often refer to as noticing and naming. So just calling out what you're doing, explaining it to the students so that they're aware of the why behind it and how that will help them to be successful, the skill that they're developing when they're thinking about that opportunity a few years ahead.
Well, and that's exactly it. It's the why. I say that all the time, help students to know the why, and then you increase engagement, then you increase academic achievement. And so it's calling out that learning and helping students to see the relevance to what it is they're learning. And, it's across all grades and subjects. Future Ready Learning K to 12 in New Brunswick is very intentional and it's everybody's responsibility, regardless of grade or subject. Everyone's a career influencer and can very easily, not an add-on to your point, intentionally integrate career into their curriculum. They just need to call out those skills and talk about how they relate to the real world. But they also can find those opportunities to talk about career pathways in relation to what it is that they're teaching, if it's a specific subject, talking about what are the different ways that we would use this learning, knowledge, the different skills and abilities within this subject area in the real world and helping students to explore that. That's not an add-on.
Yeah.
It's just a way to explore the subject matter.
Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah, it's just being intentional and explaining it as you're going along, right? Thank you for that. So Tricia, let's turn it over to some rapid fire questions for you. Obviously, you've just talked about a number of the skills that your teachers are helping students develop across the province. But in this scenario, we've got to pick one. So in this hypothetical scenario, you're the superintendent of a school board and you're tasked with deciding one competency. So one of these 21st century skills that all of your students have to display evidence of in order to graduate. What is that skill?
That's so hard, because I think there's so much diversity in the skills that, would really benefit young people. But, a real focus for us in New Brunswick has been problem solving skills. And we've really adopted the approach problem-based learning because we see the benefits of engaging in that type of experiential learning. Experiential learning is absolutely essential in future ready learning because that's when students are having authentic experiences and they are solving problems that are related to the real world. Like it truly is the type of learning that we need to be doing because students can take out their phone and look up whatever information they need to look up. Not saying that teachers aren't a wealth of information. But at the end of the day, all of us have access to the information that we need and want. We don't need anyone to tell it to us. But what we can do in a classroom that can't be found on a phone is those experiences. And so, engaging students in the problem solving skills will allow them to actually, and I'm cheating on this question, allow them to develop all of the competencies that we want them to have upon graduation. And we call that our portrait of a learner in New Brunswick. So we have a portrait of what we want our students to look like when they walk across that stage. They're autonomous and they possess those, those global competencies, those human skills that we know they really need. And I believe that engaging in authentic problems and solving those will help them to develop many, if not all of those skills that we really want them to have.
100%. Yeah. One of the questions I often ask is, if you had a magic wand, you can change anything about the curriculum, what would you change? And when I self-reflect on that in my own question, and, this is easier said than done, but I would make experiential learning mandatory for every student, or at least across high school, because you're right. It's problem solving. It's getting your hands dirty, so to say. That is when you can actually apply all that knowledge that, again, to your point, it's easy to find the knowledge these days. It's more about the application of it and being introduced to a diversity of experiences so you can figure out what you are actually interested in and what you're not. So,
right. And it's not about changing the curriculum. Like, those outcomes are in place and those documents are there to ensure that we are able to provide students with what they need in order to progress through school. It's about the instructional choices that we're making. And,
right.
This is to the point of this podcast and classrooms that every teacher has the opportunity to make those instructional choices. And so using things like problem-based learning provides that opportunity for students to work on skill development, all while figuring out what they like. And then as they engage in those problems and those types of projects in their classroom, they can be like, well, I really liked using these skills. And then you can start exploring what pathways would provide you an opportunity as an adult to use those skills. What type of careers would one have if they are really good at that particular skill?
Yeah, no, that's a great answer. And we wrote a blog post a little while ago. Well, we collaborated with the teacher who wrote the blog post, kind of explain the differences between project and problem-based learning. So for anyone who's less familiar with it, I'll link to that in the show notes as well. Both are amazing approaches. Tricia, what's a life skill that you weren't taught in high school, but maybe that you wish you were?
Oh, there may have been a few things missing there, but that's another tough one. I just think that there wasn't enough of that social emotional learning. And I think that's still a bit lacking in some regards. So, I just think that we need to be first focused on acquiring those social emotional competencies and, developing those relationships and those abilities to be able to relate to others and work with others and all of those things. I think that has to come first before you can do any of the other type of learning that needs to happen in a classroom.
100%. Yeah, it's the foundation for everything, regardless of what occupation or path you go down, whatever skills you're going to learn, you're going to be using those social emotional learning skills to support everything.
And I think it kind of like slowly gets forgotten. And so I see that in elementary school, it's done so well because that's always been a component of elementary school, that young children need to learn how to be good friends. They need to learn how to be kind and be respectful and work with others. Like everyone agrees that that's an important component of elementary school, but it's almost as if then we assume they've got it. and it slowly becomes less of a focus and more of an academic focus as you enter into middle and high. But I would argue it's just as important, or even more important, to continue to develop those competencies throughout school and beyond. I think that adults can benefit from a constant evolution and learning in those social emotional competencies, because I believe, in what I've seen in the research and in talking to industry and employers, those are the very things that are either propelling people towards success if they have those competencies, or holding them back if they don't.
Yeah. Have you explored any of the 21 toys? Do you know 21 toys?
No, I don't think so.
You're going to want to Google it afterwards. Alana was one of our recent guests on season 1, and it was a company she founded. And right now they have 2 toys out in the market. One is the empathy toy and the failure toy. And
Wow.
the way that they explain it, yeah, she's an award-winning industrial designer. So they're really cool toys. She says, or the way they phrase it, is that they're for everyone from ages 6 to CEO. It's not something that should stop, right? She talked about kindergarten and how play kind of just stops after kindergarten. And we got it right with kindergarten. And a lot of people learn through playing, right? And it shouldn't be something that just stops. So you're going to really enjoy checking those out. And if you ever want to talk to her.
Sure, that's great.
Cool. I think you kind of just answered it with your last answer. But my next question, IQ or EQ, you can only pick one. Which one are you picking?
Yeah, like I have to say EQ based on what I know and what I've been doing for the last 3 years. It's what is really going to allow our young people to be successful in the future. So much of what we do in our work can be learned in the workplace. Obviously it's important to have certain credentials and learning to back up what you're doing in work and life. But I think that success factor and happiness factor and a big piece of one's mental health is around that EQ. So I truly believe that if that social emotional learning is there, then we will see improvement in mental health. And I also believe that if young people have a purpose, if they are given the opportunity to engage in career development, then they have hope, and therefore, again, we have improved mental health outcomes. So, there's a lot of benefits to engaging in career development.
Tricia, that's a fantastic note to end it on. I could not agree more with you. So again, we're going to link to the OECD report and specifically the part that you contributed to, but where can more people go to learn kind of about all the amazing work that you and your team are doing and you yourself?
Yeah, I would suggest we have a website, and I'll share that with you, Damien, and
Sure.
so that you can share that out. And it has a little bit of everything, enough to give an insight into what we're doing in New Brunswick. It shows our best practices and what we recommend all teachers, all grades and subjects incorporate into their classrooms. But I think the best part for this podcast is on that website are a series of professional learning modules that are developed for teachers K to 12, and they were developed for New Brunswick teachers, but I've put them on the website so that they can be accessed by anyone, anywhere. And so if you're looking for, ideas, strategies, lesson plans, anything like that on how to incorporate things like labor market information, social emotional learning, global competencies, my blueprint, any of those things into your classroom, there's a module for each of those. And so if anyone's looking for ideas, that's on that website.
Thank you for doing that. Thank you for making that available. Teachers are smart people. They'll be able to make connections about how it fits into wherever they are locally, right? So
I'm sure they will.
Yeah. Tricia, thank you so much for your time and have a fantastic day.
You too. Thank you.